LPL power rankings, done. LCK power rankings, done. Time for the EU LCS power rankings for 2018 summer. Welcome to League Unlock. Eric and Mark here, back for another 10-1 countdown. And there's going to be some mix-up. Not nearly as many roster changes or moves as we saw heading into 2018 spring in EU, and that was what we expected.
Yeah, we were trying to break down who was going to get to go up next in our power rankings. Was it going to be the EU LCS or the NA LCS? And unfortunately, as NA fans, we have to say the EU LCS got further at MSI. They deserve the chance to get their power rankings out before.
Really, we had an arm wrestle, and I represented EU. And I won the arm wrestle. So here we are doing EU first. Let's start with number 10 because that makes the most sense. And it's Giants Gaming, a team that looked decent. Really, the entire bottom half of the EU LCS had some moments where they looked pretty solid, but I think it was more mid-tier teams underperforming as to what we were expecting from them. One of the few roster moves on this split comes from Giants. They got rid of Targamas and brought in Sir Nukes a lot, which doesn't make any sense because Targamas was one of the best performing players on this roster.
Right, that definitely was not the area that you would say watching Giants Gaming saying that, yeah, that was exactly who was the problem. No, there was a lot of problems with this team, and it showed that when you're saying that, we thought that the mid-pack range in the EU LCS maybe just didn't perform as well as they should have, and that's why you started to see kind of the back end of the standings start to make that climb and really start to push back. And I think that's what you really saw with Giants Gaming sticking around in contention as long as they did due to, the weakness of some of these mid-pack tier teams here in the EU LCS as far as their performance went in the spring split.
Yeah, and they got off to a red-hot start. They were 4-0, and a lot of that was because these new rosters were figuring out what exactly they were doing, how to get their synergy back. They ended up finishing 7-11, so didn't close out the split all that strong. Obviously ended up missing out on playoffs, and with that one roster change they made, I still see them hanging out at the bottom.
Yeah, I definitely would still see them as towards a bottom-level team, but I think when you're talking about who the players are on this roster, you have to look at Betsy and you have to look at Steelback. I think those are two players that if you're going to be picking up wins on the Giants, those are going to be your avenues to do it.
Yeah, and they're going to have tough matchups against the other carry threats of other teams. Let's move on to number 9, who were in the playoffs last split. We're talking about Roccat. This is one of the teams that I think really took advantage of some of these other teams you would have expected to see in the playoffs struggling. I don't see them making playoffs again.
Yeah, Roccat was definitely the team that I rode into that playoffs thinking that, yeah, they're going to get it done, and then just got some disappointment here. I think when you're looking at this roster, there are some strengths for sure. You had Memento popping off for a couple weeks there in the jungle, and then Norskaren was definitely one of the more stable supports throughout the spring split in the EU LCS, but I think Roccat is definitely going to find themselves again towards the bottom half of the EU LCS.
And I mean, Blank and Profit, their two imports, definitely had some games where they showcased they could dominate. Blank on Azir looked fantastic in some of these games. But all in all, I mean, Roccat, they did not look great in the playoffs. They got handled pretty easily. They did beat some of the bigger teams like Misfits. They had some wins against Vitality, and they were like commanding wins as well. But all in all, I don't think Rockat's going to be at the top of the standings coming here. They're actually at the bottom.
Right, and if you're Roccat, though, you have to think positively that the best thing here that you can do moving forward, looking back on that spring split, is recognize that one of the things that you were able to do very successfully was to take away these games from teams that would be towards the top end of the EU LCS, that you're not afraid to go up against anyone in this league, and you're able to go right up against them and take their best and get a victory on any day of the week. I think you need to focus on that, and if you can bring that consistency to the Rift, you're going to get better results, but not what I'm expecting this split.
Yeah, well, we'll see if Roccat can prove the haters wrong once again, because them and Giants both kind of did last split. Let's go to number 8, and it was a team that had a roller coaster in 2018 spring. They looked like one of the worst teams in the history of the LCS. Then they somehow rallied off 5 straight wins. Talking about the Unicorns of Love, who surprisingly didn't make the playoffs. It looked like they had a chance there to close out the split when that win streak kept going. It looked like Sheepy was going to perform some more magic for the squad, but they come up short. They did look leaps and bounds better towards the end of the split, though.
was very happy to see Unicorns of Love have that bounce back towards the end of the split because it was so disappointing the way that they started out that spring split and how their performance was going. Definitely better responses from them, and expect them to be more, right there again, heading towards the final weeks of the EU LCS here in the summer split. But I don't think enough has been done with this roster, and I don't think that there's going to be enough internal development to really challenge for a top spot.
Yeah, one thing you noticed last split was Samix did not quite perform at the level. I mean, he was getting MVP votes for 2017 summer, and obviously Exile still had some very questionable games. It's been like a full year, probably a year and a half now, where we've been saying if Exile doesn't feed and, gets back to his former glory, then this team could really be a legit threat. But I think he'll perform better, but I think the competition is too stiff for them to make playoffs. Let's roll on to number 7, the final non-playoff team. We're talking about H2K, who finished 5th in 2018 spring, played a hard-fought 5-game set against Vitality. They were close to winning that series, and this is another team that completely turned it around when they got the likes of Shook and Selfie into the roster. They looked like a totally different team, and Sheriff is going to be a star.
Yeah, Sheriff definitely is the one to watch here on H2K. An amazing performance from the ADC for him. It's what you want to be coming out of H2K. But when you're talking about how they were able to turn it around, you're absolutely right. Bringing in Shook, having how everything was going on with Selfie in the mid lane in that performance, it was definitely what you wanted to see towards the later half of that split. It's exactly what H2K had.
Yeah, and I think this is a team that we have them at 7th on the outside of the playoffs looking in, but I think they're a legit threat to get right back to that playoff position because Sheriff, and I'm finally happy to see Selfie on a team where there's another carry potential on that team that can kind of take over games, and I think he's going to thrive in that role. Maybe they can squeak into a playoff spot again.
Yeah, we gave H2K a good amount of flame towards the early part of the spring split.
Deservedly so.
And deservedly so. Yeah, definitely want to get that out there, that they did deserve that flame for some of the things that were going wrong with them. But you do have to give credit where it's due when it's time, because they did turn it around, and a lot of those are successful moves with Shook and Selfie. And I think that, again, moving towards here in this split, that they will have some more progress, but just not enough to get into the playoffs.
Those are your bottom 4 teams for the 2018 Summer Power Rankings. Coming up after the break, we take a look at the top 6, the contenders. These guys are headed to playoffs. Hello, friends. Welcome back to League Unlock. Eric and Mark here, counting down the power rankings for the 2018 summer split in Europia Land. That's what everyone calls it, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it's called on the map. So yeah. I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's what the globes say. People still have globes. I can't believe it. We're moving on to number 6. These are the playoff teams. We had your bottom 4, and this was a bottom tier team last split. A team that I was riding high on. I was like, these guys could get to the finals. They're going to finish top 3. Well, they made the biggest roster move of the offseason so far for EU. We're talking about Schalke. They signed Amazing as their starting jungler over Pride. I think that's enough, and they should be a better team. They should at least make playoffs this year.
The question is, though, what exact type of performance are we going to be getting from Amazing? Last time we saw him out on the Rift, it's with the Mysterious Monkeys, and the problem there is that he wasn't
the team was awful.
The team was awful, and his performance wasn't exactly standout either. It wasn't his fault, but it wasn't exactly a standout performance. So I'm excited to see how that's exactly going to fit in here with Schalke and what they're going to bring, because this is a team that does have potential to really push towards that top level in the EU LCS, because there's just so much potential on the team.
It sounds like the reason they got rid of Pride is because of some communication issues. Maybe they wanted a more vocal leader in the jungle, which is exactly something that Amazing brings. And we've seen when he's on a roster that actually has strong laners and, gifted mechanical carries, he's done pretty darn well, got into semis and quarterfinals at Worlds. Mysterious Monkeys, that's an underwhelming roster. I don't know how much you can do with that. This one, there's going to be a lot more pressure on him to perform, especially because this team had a decent amount of hype coming into spring and did not perform well. I got one leg back on the hype wagon for these guys. I think they're at least making playoffs. I'm not saying top 3.
Well, here, I'll give you a reason to get back, put that other foot onto that hype wagon for them, is because you're going to have the ADC upset there, the guy who's going to be the potential that we're talking about of how to get there and how to become one of these top-level teams, he's their potential. He's the chance for them to get there, and I think that when you're talking about the ADC changes that we've seen recently to some of these marksmen in patch 8.11, which I expect to be the patch that they should be starting on in the EU LCS, I think that this is exactly the time for him to take over and really establish himself as one of the guys to beat in the EU LCS.
Yeah, the AD carry talent pool is getting pretty spicy out in Europe with Reckless playing out of his mind and a lot of other young guys coming on and threatening him for the crown of best ADC EU. Let's move on to the next playoff team. Another disappointing performance in 2018 spring for Misfits. A lot of that because of the heavy underperformance of Senkux. There was a clear, distinct drop-off between him and Power of Evil. People were saying maybe, Senkux might actually be a side grade, might be an even change for them. Definitely not in his first split.
On that topic, talking about it, I think that people were overestimating, the exodus of talent that was leaving Europe. But you did have to say, for sure, missing Sven and Mithy from G2 and then Power of Evil from the Misfits were going to be hard roles to fill in for them. And it looked like it just wasn't enough for the Misfits. They weren't able to get enough from that mid lane position to really help the rest of the team, and everything kind of fell apart from there on out.
Yeah, and Hans Sama looked fantastic in the earlier parts of the split, but then him and Mickey X struggled a little bit in that bottom lane. But you gotta think that Misfits will bounce back here, and they should be a playoff team. They 2-0'd Fnatic. They were the only team to 2-0 them in the regular season. I mean, when you have 4 losses in the regular split, it's hard to get 2-0'd by teams. But Misfits, they showed that they can beat the best teams in the league. They just were losing games that they definitely should not have been, whether that was under preparation, maybe not having a full grasp on the meta, but they just didn't look right in a lot of those matchups, and I expect them to bounce back. They should be a playoff team, and Senkux, I don't know if he'll be that much better, but he should be better, right? Can't be worse.
You would definitely hope so, and I think if you're looking at the Misfits and where you can expect maybe a little bit more consistency this split, I think looking in the jungle in the top lane, Alphari, Maxilor, I think those are the 2 guys that you have to count on to bring you better performances more consistently, because those were the 2 guys that were definitely part of the winning combination that was able to get you so much success at Worlds last year. I think that you need to have them rolling through the EU LCS at full steam.
They had such a good opportunity to make playoffs last split. They had their destiny in their own hands, and then they ended up losing some games that they shouldn't have to close out the split. And because of that, they weren't in the playoffs. Someone that was in the playoffs is our number 4 spot on this year's Power Rankings, and they actually finished 4th on the overall split. Talking about Vitality, this young group of rookies who burst onto the scene, had an amazing 5-1 start to the split, and they basically had the attention of everyone because they were so charismatic. Jizuki's laugh was contagious. He was dominating in the laning phase, and they fell off a decent amount the second half of the split, because if Jizuki isn't 1v2ing and dominating everybody, the team's not nearly as good.
It's one of those issues when you look at Vitality, and I was one of those guys that, 2-3 wins into the season, I was all in. I was buying all the Vitality stock that I could. I was all over Jizuki. And then towards the later half, it was just not what you wanted to see from a team that should have been able to contend better than they were. And for me, I have to put that all on the god Gilius himself. I think that everyone else does share into the blame for not performing well towards the end of the split. But I think that God Gilius, I think he's the guy. You have to be better on securing Baron for your team, especially with the changes that were being made to the jungle and how things were going to be contested there. It was so vital and so important to getting your team those things, and he just was not good enough at securing it, and I think that was a huge hole for Vitality.
Yeah, it hurts when you like to talk a lot of smack, and then when you miskey Baron steals, or not even steals, secures and objective secures, you get the Smite Vicious meme attached to you. And when Gilius talks a lot, he's definitely going to feel the repercussions. But he was one of the weak links. There looked like points where he was just straight up inting in some of these games, which he wasn't. He was just unbelievably out of position. You got to expect Jizuki still to perform well, and I think mini true packs. Now Attila, that we've got a. They don't have a new AD carry. There's still Attila. After Attila the Hun, I
Attila's
believe.
a pretty cool name. I think that's pretty intimidating.
Waiting for the Attila versus Khan matchup.
Yeah,
Genghis
that's
Khan,
be wild.
they'll probably never meet because Vitaly would have to go to Worlds. But who knows?
Hey, you never know. You never know.
You never know. Let's move into the top 3. And again, it's a team that finished 3rd after the 2018 spring split. They booked their ticket to Rift rivals Splyce. This was a team that we expected to compete for the top of the standings, and they kind of went 1-1 for the first 5 weeks, and then they finally had a big win against G2 where they completely dominated them, and it kind of turned their season around, and you were like, okay, this is a legit team. And the main question mark was Nisqy, but he got all those answers questioned in the playoffs, and they look like a good team.
Heading into Spring Split 2018, looking at Splyce and Misfits, that was my first question for both of them, was talking about that mid lane. How would these changes work out for them? And then Nisqy for Splyce, it didn't work at first. It was not what we expected to see. The performances that we had seen from him prior in the NA LCS had given us hope that he would be able to handle it and come in here and actually be able to dish out some damage here. But we didn't see it until later on in the split, and then especially in playoffs, Nisqy was popping off and absolutely turned into that player that we had been seeing, able to duel with Jensen, able to duel with Bjergsen, and we saw it again here in the EU LCS this time, able to take on anyone else in lane and really able to perform. That was only in the later half of the split. So if he can keep that going on, I think Splyce has something to work for.
Yeah, and I think a bit of it had to do with he didn't seem comfortable on some of these meta picks like the Azir, the Rise. Some of his Azir ults and plays were very subpar, but then in the playoffs you saw him playing Kassadin, Swain, putting up ludicrous KDAs and really dominating those games as the featured carry, which is something only Kabe was doing earlier on in the split. So we'll see how the meta changes affect him going forward into the summer split, but I expect Nisqy to still perform pretty darn well for him.
And you never know. It's not exactly super powerful right now, but Lucian is working his way right back into people's minds. And I think, hey, mid lane Lucian with Nisqy on board might be pretty dangerous.
Bring him in all 3 lanes. I want Lucian flexed bot, mid, or top, all of them. Because, yeah, these new item changes, he looks very interesting. That Essence Reaver looks pretty busted on him.
Oh, yeah.
So bring back Lucian. We're moving into the top 2, and what a surprise who these top 2 teams are going to be. Hard to put G2 above Fnatic because they got 5-0'd by them in the regular season of spring. And G2, again, there were moments where you looked like, all right, G2, whole new roster, save for Perks, and they just look like they're still the kings of EU. But then they're losing games to Giants, squeaking out victories against that same squad. They probably should have got 2-0'd by Giants, which is something you wouldn't expect of old G2. So they had moments, but still a lot of question marks with this team.
When you were watching G2 this split, one of the problems with them that you hadn't ever really seen from G2 before is that they were playing down to the level of their competition. You used to see the G2, no matter who it was in the EU LCS, it was the exact same preparation, the exact same type of stomps that they would go through, and that's how they would win their games. But then when you're watching this version of G2, it was not the same, it wasn't as clean, and again, stepping down to the level of their competition some days, and it really did come back to bite them in some of these games that they did end up losing, that they should have been able to win. But now that said, heading in towards that finals last split, we did have the confidence in them. I had confidence in Wonder heading in that top lane matchup against Bwipo. I thought he was going to be great.
Should have been a massacre.
And then, of course, G2 just got absolutely smashed by them. Now, I still think there's a lot of positives here. I think Perks can still be a top-level mid laner here in EU, and I think that Jankos definitely is the jungler that you want to be having for G2. But the performances need to be there against the bottom-level teams the exact same as they are against the top.
Yeah, and Perks was outclassed by Caps, and obviously that bottom lane was a big question mark for them throughout the entirety of the split. We'll see if Hjarnan and Wadid can look a little better and more consistent throughout the entire regular season. Time for number 1. How could it be Fnatic? Unbelievable. What a bold put as the top-ranked team heading into 2018 summer. They got out of groups at MSI. Shoutouts to Liquid. They tried their very best. But Fnatic advanced. Obviously, they crushed G2 in the finals, 14-4 in the regular season. There's really no argument against Fnatic being the top-ranked team heading into summer, except for maybe the Bwipo Soaz controversy. But I think they can turn that into a positive.
I absolutely think that, and I hope that they should be turning that into a positive. When you're looking at exactly what Fnatic needs to be doing, is that exactly copying the success from MSI. They were fantastic there, really proving themselves to the world that the EU LCS is a strong region and can deal with anyone else coming from anywhere else. I think that that's one of the important takeaways here here is that Fnatic is a top-level world team, and we should be bringing that expectation towards the EU LCS, where they had shown that, yeah, we were the best team here in the spring, and they've only shown an improvement heading towards summer. How could they not be our #1 team?
You've got to expect Reckless when he's not going against Uzi in lane all the time. He'll be back to his more dominant self. Clearly a mental block.
I want to see him on Tristana again, something like that.
Clearly a mental block when he's going against Uzi. And Caps, he's the best mid laner in EU. I expect him to retain that crown in 2018 summer, and Fnatic are definitely going to be the favorites going into the final split before Worlds.